Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time of day you're watching this video. This is the ultra super fast video reviewing the Holodomor. Here we go. This video is for students who were absent and missed class. Here we go. We're going super fast. We're going to skip through the big ideas. If this is too fast, you can pause it on a particular slide and read through the big ideas yourself. You can also download this PowerPoint and read through it. Skipping some of these other points in this fast video. Here we go. Introduction. We're going to skip this for the sake of speed, and we're going to start off with you should know the word famine, which is a food shortage. And you should know that the Holodomor means terror famine. Okay, ultra fast, here we go. Karl Marx. You should know that he is one of the authors of Marxism, a philosophy that bears his name, which is a social economic political philosophy that analyzes the impact of the ruling class on laborers, leading to uneven distribution of wealth and privileges in society. It stimulates the worker to protest the injustice. These writings inspired communism in Russia and later the world. Holodomor. Some of the ideologies you'll need to know are communism, Stalinism, totalitarianism, and Marxism. Feel free to pause on this slide. In this ultra fast version, we are not going to spend a lot of time on these ideologies in this video to go fast. You should also know socialism and nationalism in particular. Stalin wanted to repress Ukrainian nationalism, so in that context, it relates to the Holodomor. I should back up, I suppose, and say one thing that you really need to know about Stalinism. It was not very democratic. It was centralized. It was totalitarian, so there was a lot of authority and authoritarianism and the killing of opposition, which is interlinked with totalitarianism. Okay, moving back forward here, going really fast. Because it's not written out here, I should quickly explain that there's many types of communism and many types of socialism. So if I go back to communism, you'll see in the definition all property is publicly owned, and there's different variations and degrees of what this means by all property. This is specifically usually meaning the means of production, the means of making wealth, land, and factories. There are some extreme forms of communism that focus on also personal property and clothing being conformist to a community standard. Okay, moving on, we've got different types of socialism. So socialism, again, like communism, is a bit of a spectrum, but it's moving towards more government ownership of the means of production and land and creation of wealth, government facilities, government hospitals, government schools. The opposite of that would be capitalism, which would want to put all that in the hands of individual citizens and private corporations and businesses. The idea would be on the capitalist side that the more that's in the private hands, the better, and the smaller the government is better, where socialism says there is value and a good reason for having it in the hands of the government and or the community. Democratic socialism focuses on including democracy while maintaining this idea of wanting to move towards more government ownership of the means of production and land and other institutions like hospitals, schools, and universities. Social democracy wants to have a strong welfare state while maintaining the strengths of capitalism and some of the advantages of capitalism. In a simple, I'm going really fast and really simple form, but there is still room for capitalism in social democracy while still having a strong sense of social things like access to free healthcare, access to free university, and welfare state type protections. That is a very simple form. Anyway, got to move on. We're going on the fast version. We're not going to go in depth on that. You can spend hours talking about the definition of democratic socialism and social democracy. Okay, USSR. You need to know that it stands for United Soviet Socialist Republic. You need to know that it was a huge country, the largest in the world, including Europe and Asia. You should know that it has the word Soviet, it has the word socialist in there. Socialist, not communist. So there's a sense of using this word socialism in this form. So you can see the word socialism is used in many, 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 many ways. So it's a very, very it's a word that has a broad types of definitions where it's used in many multiple ways. The other thing that's significant is Ukraine and Russia were both included in the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine became independent. And there's a huge story about that and how Ukraine had nuclear weapons at the time and what to do about that in a treaty that was signed at that point in time. Okay, Bolsheviks. On the fast version, well, you should know that the Bolsheviks are not interested in democracy. They boycotted the elections in the First State Duma in 1906. They seized power in the October Revolution in 1917. They suppressed all rival political organizations. So they are not really interested in collaboration, democracy, power sharing. And that started the stage for an authoritarian government that grew more authoritarian towards totalitarian, where there's total control. Lenin was a leader of the Bolshevik Party and the Bolshevik Revolution. And although somebody can make the argument that he was both authoritarian and totalitarian, Stalin really is where extreme totalitarianism comes to rise in Russia and the execution of many, many, many rivals. New economic policy. This was sort of a moment of reduced centralization. That means less authoritarianism, more autonomy, more freedom for the different regions to interpret things different ways. And this time period in the Soviet state allowed a time for Ukrainian culture and nationalism to thrive, a growing sense of literature, poetry, arts, and intellectuals in Ukraine. This growth of Ukrainian culture and nationalism would eventually be something that Stalin is not wanting to continue. Cheka, NKVD. This is the first Soviet state security organizations that were created by decree on December 20th, 1917 by Vladimir Lenin. After 1922, the Czech underwent a series of reorganizations and numerous successors until the creation of the KGB in 1954. And you can see the art showing the power of the secret service, something that would be scary for the opposition. And the KGB has a huge part of the role in the Soviet Union, as well as even influencing modern Russia today. Okay, Joseph Stalin. Eventually, there's something named after him called Stalinism, and eventually he's an inspiration for communist countries all over the world, and he is focusing on authoritarianism and totalitarianism, getting total control of the country, and forcibly collectivizing factories and agriculture. The focus is on agriculture here because of the story of Ukraine and the Holodomor, but it would also be the collectivization of mines and other operations. There's also, of course, a use of prison labor camps and gulags and all kinds of horrific stories. Significance: Holodomor is considered a genocide or a criminal act of Stalin's regime by some countries. Specifically, Stalin was in charge of the time of the Holodomor, so he would be considered, in some cases, responsible as a perpetrator of the Holodomor. Kulaks, Soviet history. A wealthy, prosperous peasant farmer generally characterized as one who owns a relatively large farm. However, this is used as a derogatory slur. Somebody who is cheap or tight-fisted is sort of what the slur would mean, meaning they're not wanting to share their wealth or food. Definition of genocide, Article 2. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole and part a national, ethnic, racial or religious group, such as, okay, so here is where the debate is often focused. Not always, but often focused. I guess the other aspect would be on the aspect of intent, whether it was intentional or accidental. But the one aspect for the Holodomor would be, was it targeting one of these groups? Was it a political thing, not covered by these four categories? Was it a classist thing, rich versus poor? That's not covered by one of these groups. So, in order to meet the criteria of the definition, you would have to show that the Stalin regime was intentionally targeting the nation of Ukraine, the ethnic group called Ukraine, to show that it was both intentional and targeting these groups. And so this is where some of the debate lies. Okay, 5-year plans. This is term number 12. In the Soviet Union, the first 5-year plan implemented by Joseph Stalin concentrated on developing heavy industry and collectivizing agriculture. Significance: this policy and plan put Stalin in conflict with the farmers who resisted collectivization, and this especially happened in Ukraine, where there was the Holodomor. The collectivization. You should understand this word. This means basically small farms become one big, massive, government-owned collective farm. Policy adopted by the Soviet government pursued most intensely between 1929 and 1933 to transform the traditional agriculture in the Soviet Union to reduce the economic power of the kulaks, prosperous peasants. Significance: the elimination of the kulaks was an integral part of collectivization. Some Ukrainians would have seen this collectivization as a return backwards towards serfdom rather than moving forward to something better. Dekulakization: how Stalin eliminated the Ukrainian kulak class. On January 30th, 1930, the Politburo of the Central Committee issued a resolution. There's a link to it. The significance: Holodomor is considered a genocide or criminal act of Stalin's regime by some countries. Point number 15, you should know quotas. And specifically, to summarize, on the fast version, you should know that the quotas were much too high for the Ukrainians to feasibly follow through with. You can pause this video here if you would like to take a look further on this slide, but I'm going to go fast in this version of the video. In Ukraine, the production quotas for food production was set too high. It was impossible to meet without starving. And then the Gulag. The Gulag was a system of Soviet labor camps and accompanying detention and transit camps and prisons. From 1920s to the mid-1950s, it housed political prisoners and criminals of the Soviet Union. At its height, the Gulag imprisoned millions of people. This is from Britannica. Significant: some rich, resistant peasants from Ukraine were also part of the prisoners sent to the Gulags. So that would mean that some Ukrainians are dying by starvation or famine, and some are being worked in the gulags or worked to death. And there's a sense of targeting also the intellectual class of the Ukraine and the cultural class of Ukraine who create culture. Okay, Walter Duranty. Now, this is a really, really interesting story to dig deeper in a longer, slower version. This is the fast version. So what you need to know about Walter Duranty is he was accused of being a journalist for fake news a long time ago. And he was so talented at what he was doing that he won a 1932 Pulitzer Prize. Now, this is really interesting as we move into the 21st century, and we have to learn how to think about fake news and fake media and propaganda, and how hard it is to teach students to understand what is a good academic source of information and what is a risky source of information. That risky sources of information have fooled many people in the past. This is not an easy job to do, to sort out good information from bad information. And so this is an interesting example where at first Walter Duranty was able to fool people and win a Pulitzer Prize, and perhaps for very extreme propaganda at least, or it's debatable how extreme the propaganda was. Anyway, read about it to find out about the debate. Significance: this primarily relates to the stage denial because of the Soviet Union denied the impact of the Holodomor. It also shows the significance of propaganda and misinformation. It looks like my lighting has just automatically gone down by a timer. Pause. So one type of possible hero fighting against genocide would be the journalists that discover and inform about the truth of what's going on. And this is a very dangerous job for journalists to do, but it's also important work. They're not considered this often recognized like the heroes who save lives, but it's important work. Gareth Jones, he was a wealth journalist and one of the first to expose the Holodomor. His death and murder was very suspicious. Gareth Jones died in a largely discredited figure on the eve of his 30th birthday, the truth about Stalin's Holodomor only coming to light years later. However, today he is revered as a national hero in the Ukraine and is honored at both Cambridge and Aberystwyth universities. Okay, that's number 18, Gareth Jones. Another journalist, Polish-Canadian journalist. She was one of the first journalists to write about the Holodomor, making the journey by car September 1932 through the agricultural heartland of the Soviet Union. During the Holodomor, she previously spent a month traveling the Soviet far north, where she encountered Ukrainians who had fled from famine conditions in their homeland or who had been exiled and were being ruthlessly exploited as slave labor. Again, another potential hero in information. Class warfare, number 20. This is a term you should be aware of, which comes from both communism and Marxism. Conflict between social or economic classes, especially between capitalist and proletariat classes. So, does this concept inherently exist, or is this a construct where this concept does not actually exist, or is it sometimes existing and sometimes not existing, this conflict between the classes? And how is it polarized, and how is it minimized? This is a sort of a debatable thing, much like in the stage polarization, where differences between groups becomes emphasized. Okay, enemies of the people, number 21. This is an important term to be aware of that's been used, and sometimes it's got various forms with a slight change of language. But this is a red flag that you might be hearing some type of strongly worded opinion, bias, propaganda point of view that you should be like, is this really true? Are these people really the enemies of the people, or is this propaganda? Enemies of the citizens, enemies of the country, enemies of the patriots, whatever variation of enemies of the people. This is a term to be really important for understanding the present and the future, as well as the past. This usually is a designation for political opponents rather than people who are really criminal. Let's hear that again. This is really a designation for political opponents rather than people who are really criminal and against the people, which means that these are enemies of the political party in power, not necessarily enemies of the people. These people are then subjected to political repression. This term usually is used as propaganda to convince the majority that it is in their interest to repress a minority. Okay, the two enemies of the people are criminals and government. So let us tie down the second down with the chains of the Constitution so the second will not become the legalized version of the first, from Thomas Jefferson. Now that is debatable versus your opinion on whether small government or big government is better or worse. But that's a quote from Thomas Jefferson with the argument that the risk is a super powerful government could be more of an enemy of the people than the opposition to the government. All right, perhaps the opposition party to the main ruling government is actually an ally of the people in some cases. All right, we're going to skip 22 and we get to Khrushchev. All right, this is the fast version and I'm taking too long. So what are the nuts and bolts, the key things you need to know about Khrushchev? He was a leader of the Soviet Union, 53 to 64. He had a policy of de-Stalinization and it had widespread repercussions throughout the communist world. He's taking an established communist and Soviet hero and saying he did some bad things that we need to think about. Think about Canada and Truth and Reconciliation, where Canadians are thinking about, hey, there's some historical wrongs that have been done in Canada that we need to think truthfully about and think about how to reconcile. And so this is going on where Stalin is being recognized where he's done some things that were brutal and murderous. All right, so that is the fast version. Pause it on here if you want to read the full quote there. There's Khrushchev part 3. Again, pause this slide if you want to see more of that. We're going fast here in de-Stalinization. We mentioned that earlier. So this is the part of Stalin is being deconstructed as a hero and taken apart. He's no longer a hero. His statues are coming down. His posters are being removed. Pause at any of these slides if you want to slow down. This is the fast version. And you should also, of course, know Stalinism and totalitarianism. Notice this big brother is watching you. Um, so there's a spectrum of authoritarianism and a spectrum of totalitarianism, where with authoritarianism, there's definitely a clear authority giving direction, and totalitarianism moves into total control and tends to micromanage things that are very personal and private. And so Big Brother is watching you, and it gets into that sense of total control. Totalitarianism, they're watching what you read, what you think, what you watch. And so this is maybe modern stories of the laws of North Korea get into the idea of the total control in North Korea, where things like haircuts are mandated in law, what haircuts you can have and what you cannot have, what kind of music you can listen to, and what kind of music you cannot listen to. In fact, in North Korea, listening to the wrong kind of music can lead to a death sentence. And so this is that sort of sense of total control. In extremist governments and extreme governments with total controls where you're more likely to see genocides. So preventing totalitarianism is part of a prevention strategy, perhaps, to prevent genocide. All right, this is the fast version. Feel free to rewind and pause and watch any of the slides again. You can also download this PowerPoint to review. This is specifically for students who were absent. If you have any questions, send me an email. Okay, good luck. Now, if you found this video helpful, don't forget you can like and subscribe. Thank you very much. Have a great night. Oh, it's still recording. Stop, stop.